God's message for you today is, I'm still with you, but it doesn't feel like it, does it? You woke up tired again, not just physically, but in your mind. The same thoughts are already there, waiting, whispering that nothing is changing, that maybe this silence means something. And the part that unsettles you the most is that you believe in God, yet He feels distant anyway. You try to pray, but it feels heavy, repetitive, like your words aren't going anywhere. And somewhere deep inside, a question keeps forming that you don't even want to fully face. If God is still with you, why does it feel like you're going through this alone? Because right now, it doesn't feel like presence, it feels like silence. And what if that silence doesn't mean what you think it means? You wake up, but it doesn't feel like a new beginning. It feels like you never really rested. Your body moved through the night, but your mind stayed awake, replaying, questioning, worrying. And now here you are, again another morning, another weight sitting quietly on your chest. There are thoughts already waiting for you. They don't knock. They don't ask permission. They just start speaking. What if nothing changes? What if this feeling never goes away? What if you're on your own more than you thought? And the hardest part is, you believe in God. That's what makes this so confusing. Because somewhere deep inside, you know the truth. You've heard it before. You've read it, maybe even held on to it in better seasons. God is near. God is faithful. God does not leave. But right now, that truth feels distant, not because you've rejected it, but because your emotions are louder than your faith. You try to pray, but your words feel heavy. Sometimes they don't even come out. Other times they come out the same way they did yesterday, and the day before that. You ask, you wait, you listen, and all you hear is silence. And slowly, quietly, a question begins to form in your mind. If God is with me, why does it feel like this? Why does His presence feel so far when I need it the most? Why does waiting feel so long, so empty? You don't say it out loud. Maybe you've tried to avoid thinking it too clearly, but it's there, underneath everything else. That subtle fear that maybe silence means something more. Maybe it means distance. Maybe it means you did something wrong. Maybe it means God stepped back. And that thought, it doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly, but it settles deep. Because when your heart is tired, your mind starts looking for explanations. And if it doesn't find truth, it creates its own. So you start interpreting everything through what you feel. The silence becomes absence. The delay becomes rejection. The waiting becomes a sign that something is off. And without even realizing it, you begin to carry something heavier than your situation. You begin to carry a distorted view of God. Not because you chose to, but because pain has a way of reshaping perception. You still believe, but your belief feels fragile. You still pray, but your prayers feel uncertain. You still hope, but your hope feels tired. And maybe no one around you really sees this part. On the outside, things may look normal. You keep going. You show up. You do what needs to be done. But inside, there's a quiet battle happening. A constant tension between what you know and what you feel. Between faith and fear. Between truth and the voice in your mind that keeps asking, what if you're alone in this? And the truth is, this isn't just about one bad day. This is a season, a stretch of time where things don't make sense the way they used to, where clarity feels out of reach, where answers are delayed, where God feels silent. And that silence, it tests something deep inside you, because it forces a question you can't avoid forever. What do you do when God doesn't feel close? Do you trust what you feel, or do you hold on to something deeper? Right now, it may not feel clear. Right now, your emotions may be leading the way. But what if the problem isn't that God has stepped away? What if the problem is how silence is being interpreted? What if what feels like absence is actually something else entirely? That's where this journey begins. Not with answers yet, but with a question that needs to be faced. Honestly, because everything changes depending on how you understand this moment. So before you assume that God is distant, before you let your thoughts define what is real, there's something deeper that needs to be uncovered, something you might not have seen yet. And until you see it, the silence will keep feeling like distance. But what if it isn't? There is something deeply unsettling about silence. Not just any silence, but the kind that comes after you've spoken, after you've prayed, after you've opened your heart and waited for something, anything, in return. Because silence, when you don't understand it, feels personal. It feels like being ignored. It feels like distance. And if you're not careful, it begins to feel like absence. That's where the misunderstanding quietly begins. You start measuring God's presence by your emotional awareness of Him. If you feel peace, you assume He's near. If you feel nothing or worse, anxiety, you begin to wonder if He has stepped away. But here is a truth that doesn't always align with what you feel. God's presence is not proven by your emotions and that tension. It's hard to accept because emotions feel real. They are immediate, intense, and convincing. When your heart feels empty, it doesn't feel like a temporary state. It feels like reality itself. So when you don't feel God, your mind tries to explain it. Maybe He's distant. Maybe He's disappointed. Maybe He's silent because He doesn't want to respond. But what if none of those explanations are true? What if silence is not God withdrawing, but God working in a way your emotions can't detect? This is where things begin to shift, even if only slightly, because the assumption that God must always be felt to be present is not something rooted in truth. It's rooted in expectation. And expectations, when they go unchallenged, can distort reality. Think about it. There are moments in life where the most important things are happening beneath the surface. Growth that you cannot see. Change that you cannot measure in real time. Processes that are quiet but essential. Spiritually, it often works the same way. God does not always move in ways that create immediate emotional feedback. Sometimes His work is quiet on purpose, not because He is absent, but because He is doing something deeper than what your feelings can interpret. And this is where many people struggle. Because when nothing feels like it's happening, it's easy to assume that nothing is happening. But that assumption can lead you in the wrong direction. It can make you step back when you're actually supposed to stay. It can make you doubt when you're actually being developed. It can make you interpret stillness as neglect when it might actually be intentional. So the real question is not just why is God silent? The deeper question is, what does His silence actually mean? Because if your understanding of silence is wrong, everything built on that understanding will also feel wrong. Your prayers will feel ineffective. Your waiting will feel pointless. Your faith will feel unstable. But if silence does not mean absence, then something else must be true. Something you may not have fully considered yet. And here's where the tension increases. Because even if you accept that God might still be present, it doesn't immediately remove the discomfort. You still feel the quiet. You still face the unanswered questions. You still wake up some days with that same weight. So how do you reconcile that? How do you trust a presence you cannot feel? How do you stay steady when your emotions are inconsistent? This is where faith begins to separate itself from feeling. Not as a denial of emotion, but as a deeper anchor than emotion. Because if your connection with God depends only on what you feel, then your faith will rise and fall with every internal shift. But if there is something more stable, something beyond your emotional state, then maybe silence doesn't have the power you thought it had. Maybe it's not a signal of distance. Maybe it's an invitation to see differently, to trust differently, to grow in a way that isn't dependent on constant reassurance. But that raises another question. If silence is not absence, then why does it trigger so much fear? Why does your mind react the way it does? Why do your thoughts become louder when everything else feels quiet? Because there's another layer to this. And it's not just about how God works. It's about how your mind responds. And until you understand that, the silence will keep feeling heavier than it actually is. There's a reason the silence feels so heavy. It's not just because of what you're experiencing. It's because of how your mind is interpreting what you're experiencing. Your mind doesn't like uncertainty. It looks for patterns, explanations, conclusions. It tries to make sense of everything, especially when emotions are involved. And when something doesn't make sense, like waiting, like silence, it doesn't stay neutral for long. It fills the gap, and most of the time, It fills that gap with fear. That's why your thoughts can become so loud when everything else feels quiet. It's like your mind is trying to solve something that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And in that process, it starts creating narratives. Maybe God is distant. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe this is never going to change. But here's the part that often goes unnoticed. Not every thought that feels true is actually true. And that's difficult to accept because your thoughts don't present themselves as opinions. They present themselves as facts. They come with confidence, they come with emotion, they come with urgency. And when you're already feeling tired, already feeling uncertain, you don't always have the strength to question them. So instead, you absorb them. You let them define the moment. You let them shape your perception of God, of yourself, of your future. But what if your mind is not interpreting this season accurately? What if the thoughts you're hearing are not revealing truth, but reacting to discomfort? Because there is a difference. Truth remains steady, even when emotions fluctuate. But fear adapts, fear shifts. Fear looks for evidence to support itself, even if that evidence is incomplete. So when you're in a season of waiting, fear doesn't stay quiet. It starts connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. Silence becomes rejection. Delay becomes denial. Stillness becomes abandonment. And before you realize it, your internal world becomes filled with conclusions that were never confirmed. This is where the real battle is happening. Not just in your circumstances, but in your mind. Because if your mind accepts those interpretations as truth, your emotions will follow. And then your faith starts to feel unstable, not because God has changed, but because your perception has shifted. This is why it is so important to slow down and examine what you're believing. Not every thought deserves authority over your heart. Not every internal voice is aligned with truth. Some thoughts are simply reactions to fear, to uncertainty, to the discomfort of not knowing what comes next. And if you don't recognize that, those thoughts will begin to lead you. They will tell you how to feel. They will tell you what to expect. They will quietly influence how you see God. But here's the question that changes everything. What if your thoughts are not the most reliable source of truth in this moment? What if what feels real is not actually what is real? Because if that's true, then something inside you needs to shift. Not your circumstances, not yet, but your awareness. Your ability to pause and say, just because I'm thinking this doesn't mean it's true. That's not denial. That's discernment. And discernment creates space. Space between what you feel and what is actually real. Space between fear and faith. Space where truth can begin to enter, even if quietly. But that leads to another tension. If you can't fully trust your thoughts, then how do you know what is true? How do you ground yourself when your emotions are unstable and your mind is questioning everything? Because it's one thing to recognize that your thoughts can mislead you. It's another thing to know where to anchor yourself instead. And until you find that anchor, the battle in your mind will keep repeating itself. Different day, same weight, same questions. So maybe the issue isn't just that God feels silent. Maybe the issue is that other voices have become louder. Voices that were never meant to guide you, but somehow started shaping the way you see everything. And if that's the case, then the next step isn't just about understanding God's silence. It's about learning how to recognize what is actually true, even when everything inside you feels uncertain. Achisomi point. When the silence stretches long enough, prayer itself can start to feel complicated. Not because you don't believe in it, but because you don't know what to expect from it anymore. You sit down, or maybe you just pause in the middle of your day and you try to speak to God. But something feels different now. The words don't flow the same way. The confidence isn't as strong. There's a quiet hesitation, like part of you's wondering if this is even making a difference. And that thought, it can slowly reshape how you approach prayer. Instead of connection, it becomes a test to see if something will happen, a test to see if God will respond, a test to see if your situation will finally change. And when nothing immediate shifts, it's easy to walk away feeling like prayer didn't work. But what if that's not what prayer was meant to be? What if the frustration you feel isn't because prayer is ineffective, but because your expectation of prayer has become too narrow? Because when prayer becomes only about results, it loses something essential. It loses its foundation as a relationship. And without realizing it, you can start treating prayer like a transaction. I ask, and then I wait for something in return. I speak, and then I expect a response I can recognize. And when that doesn't happen the way you hoped, disappointment begins to build. But here's a deeper truth that often gets overlooked. Prayer is not just about getting answers, it's about staying connected, even in silence, especially in silence. Because connection is not always measured by visible feedback. Think about it. In any relationship, there are moments where words are not constant, where responses are not immediate, where understanding is not always clear. But that doesn't mean the relationship has disappeared. It means it's moving through a different kind of space, a quieter one. And spiritually, this matters more than you might realize. Because if you only value prayer when it produces something you can see or feel, then in seasons like this, you'll slowly start pulling away. Not intentionally, but gradually. You'll pray less. You'll open up less. You'll start holding things in because part of you feels like it doesn't change anything anyway. But that's exactly where the disconnect begins, not from God's side, but from yours. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens subtly. A little less openness, a little more hesitation, a little more distance in how you approach Him. But what if prayer in this season is not about changing your situation immediately? What if it's about keeping your heart aligned, even when nothing around you seems to shift? Because there is something happening in you when you continue to pray, even without clear answers. Something steady, something quiet, something that doesn't always feel powerful in the moment, but is shaping you over time. It's building consistency. It's strengthening trust. It's teaching you to stay, even when it would be easier to step back. And that kind of growth doesn't always come with strong emotions. Sometimes it feels ordinary. Sometimes it feels repetitive. Sometimes it even feels like nothing is happening. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means the work is deeper than what you can immediately feel. And this is where the tension returns. Because even if you understand this, even if you accept that prayer is about connection, you still have questions. You still want clarity. You still wonder when things will change. And that desire is real. It's not wrong to want answers. It's not wrong to hope for movement. But maybe the focus needs to shift slightly from why isn't God responding the way I expect to what is being formed in me while I wait. Because that question opens a different perspective. It moves your attention from external results to internal transformation. And that's where something begins to change. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. Your prayers become less about pressure and more about presence. Less about controlling outcomes and more about staying connected. And in that shift, something stabilizes inside you, even if your circumstances stay the same. But that leads to another question. If prayer is about connection, and if God is still present even in silence, then what is the purpose of this waiting? Why does it have to take so long? Why does it feel like you're in a season that isn't moving forward? Because understanding prayer is one part of the journey, but understanding waiting, that's where the struggle often goes. Even deeper, waiting has a way of changing how everything feels. At first, it doesn't seem so difficult. You believe something will happen soon. You hold on to hope with a sense of expectation. There's patience, but it's still light, still manageable. But then time passes and nothing changes. The same questions remain. The same prayers are repeated. The same silence lingers. And slowly, what once felt like hopeful waiting begins to feel like something heavier. It starts to feel like you're stuck, like life is moving, but not for you. Like everyone else is stepping forward while you're standing still, trying to understand why your season feels so delayed. And if you're not careful, waiting begins to take on a meaning it was never meant to carry. It starts to feel like punishment, like something is being withheld, like you're being overlooked. And that interpretation shapes how you experience every day. Because when waiting feels like punishment, frustration grows. You begin to ask questions that don't always have immediate answers. Why is this taking so long? What am I doing wrong? Why does it seem like nothing is changing? And beneath those questions, there's something deeper. A quiet fear that maybe this season has no purpose. But what if that's not true? What if waiting is not a sign that something is wrong, but a space where something is being prepared? This is one of the hardest truths to accept because preparation doesn't always feel productive. It doesn't always feel like progress. In fact, most of the time, it feels like the opposite. It feels slow, unclear, uncertain. But just because something feels slow doesn't mean it's not moving. And just because you can't see progress doesn't mean there is no progress. Because some of the most important changes don't happen around you. They happen within you. Quietly, gradually, almost unnoticed at first. Waiting has a way of revealing what's inside your heart. It exposes your fears. It brings your expectations to the surface. It shows you where your trust feels strong and where it feels fragile. And that process, as uncomfortable as it is, has a purpose because you can't grow in areas you never see. You can't strengthen what you've never had to rely on. And sometimes, the only way to develop deeper trust is to walk through a season where control is no longer an option. That's what waiting does. It removes the illusion that you can manage everything. It brings you face to face with uncertainty. And in that space, you're invited to respond differently. Not with control, but with trust. Not with answers, but with faith. But that's not easy. Because trust, especially in uncertain seasons, doesn't feel natural. It feels like letting go of something you want to hold on to. It feels like stepping forward without knowing what comes next. And your mind resists that. It wants clarity. It wants timelines. It wants reassurance that things will work out in a way you can understand. But what if clarity is not always given at the beginning? What if it comes in pieces along the way? Because if you had all the answers right now, you wouldn't need to trust. And if you didn't need to trust, something essential in your spiritual growth would never develop. That doesn't mean the waiting is easy. It doesn't mean the questions disappear. It means that the purpose of this season might be deeper than the outcome you heave focusing on. Maybe it's not just about where you're going. Maybe it's about who you're becoming while you're getting there. And that shift in perspective changes something important. It doesn't remove the waiting, but it gives it meaning. It allows you to see this season not as a delay without purpose, but as a process with intention, even if you don't fully understand it yet. And still, there's one more tension that remains, because even if you begin to see waiting differently, even if you accept that something is being formed in you, you still have to live through it, day by day, moment by moment, without full clarity, without complete answers. So how do you keep moving forward like that? How do you stay steady when you don't know what's ahead? Because understanding waiting is one thing, but living faithfully in the middle of it, that's where the real transformation begins. There comes a point in the waiting where understanding is no longer enough. You can recognize that silence doesn't mean absence. You can begin to question your thoughts. You can even accept that waiting has a purpose. But none of that removes the daily reality of living in the middle of uncertainty. Because at the end of the day, you still have to wake up and move forward. And that's where a new kind of challenge begins. Not the challenge of figuring everything out, but the challenge of continuing without having everything figured out. This is where many people feel stuck. Not because they don't believe, but because they don't know what to do next. You want clarity before you move. You want direction before you act. You want assurance before you step forward. But what if that's not how this season works? What if clarity is not meant to come all at once? What if it's meant to unfold, step by step? Because there is something important about moving forward without full visibility. It shifts your dependence. Instead of relying on complete understanding, you begin to rely on daily trust. And daily trust, it looks different than you might expect. It's not dramatic. It's not always emotional. Sometimes it's very simple. It's choosing to keep going even when you don't feel motivated. It's choosing to stay consistent even when nothing seems to be changing. It's choosing to take one small step without knowing where the next 10 will lead. And that can feel uncomfortable because your mind still wants the bigger picture. It still wants to know how everything will turn out. It still wants guarantees. But this is where something shifts internally. Because instead of asking, what will happen next? You begin to ask, what is the next right step I can take today? That question changes everything. It brings your focus out of the unknown future and into the present moment. Because the truth is, you may not have clarity for the entire path, but you often have enough clarity for the next step, even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant, even if it doesn't answer all your questions. And those small steps, they matter more than you think, because they build momentum, not always externally, but internally. They strengthen your ability to move forward without needing constant reassurance. They teach you that progress doesn't always come from big breakthroughs. Sometimes it comes from quiet consistency. And this is where purpose begins to look different. Not like a clear, fully revealed plan, but like a path that unfolds as you walk it, one decision at a time, one act of faith at a time, one moment of trust at a time. And in that process, something inside you becomes more stable, not because everything is certain, but because you're no longer waiting for certainty to move. You're learning to move with trust. And that changes how you experience this season. Because instead of feeling completely stuck, you begin to see that you're still moving, even if slowly, even if quietly. But there's still a deeper layer to this. Because moving forward in small steps requires something that doesn't always come easily. It requires surrender. Not the kind of surrender that feels like giving up, but the kind that releases control. The kind that says, I don't need to have everything figured out to keep going. And that's difficult because control feels safe. Control feels like protection. Control feels like a way to avoid uncertainty. But in reality, control often creates more tension because it tries to force clarity where clarity hasn't been given yet. And that leads to frustration. But surrender creates space. Space for trust, space for peace, space for you to breathe again, even in the middle of the unknown. And here's the turning point that begins to form, even if quietly. Maybe God has not been withholding direction. Maybe He's been inviting you to trust Him in a deeper way, not just when things are clear, but especially when they're not. Because trust that only exists in certainty is limited, but trust that grows in uncertainty becomes strong, steady, unshaken. And that's the kind of faith that transforms you, not just temporarily, but deeply. But now, everything leads to one final realization. Because if God has been present all along, if silence is not absence, if your thoughts are not always reliable, if waiting is preparation, if purpose is found in daily steps, then there's one question left that changes everything. What if you were never alone in this? Not even for a moment. And if that's true, then what you've been feeling needs to be seen differently. Because the reality of God's presence has not changed. Only your perception of it has. And that realization, it opens the door to something you've been needing all along. Not more answers, but peace. What if the thing that has been troubling you the most was never what it seemed? What if the silence that felt like distance was never distance at all? Because when you begin to step back and look at everything differently, something starts to become clear. God did not leave, not in the moments you questioned, not in the nights when your thoughts wouldn't slow down, not in the prayers that felt like they disappeared into nothing, not even in the moments when you felt the most alone. He was there the entire time. But the struggle was never just about His presence. It was about your perception. Because when your mind is filled with fear, silence gets interpreted through that fear. And fear has a way of rewriting reality. It takes what is neutral and makes it negative. It takes what is unclear and makes it feel final. It takes what is quiet and makes it feel empty. But now, something has shifted. Not necessarily in your circumstances, not necessarily in the timing, but inside you, because you're starting to see that what you felt was not the full picture. You're starting to understand that your emotions, while real, were not always accurate. You're beginning to recognize that your thoughts, while loud, were not always true. And most importantly, you're realizing that God's presence was never dependent on your ability to feel it. That changes everything, because now, instead of asking, "Where is God?" you begin to rest in a different truth. He is here. even in the quiet, even in the waiting, even in the moments that don't make sense yet. And that realization, it doesn't come with noise. It comes with peace. A calm, steady kind of peace that doesn't need every answer to exist. A peace that doesn't depend on everything working out immediately. A peace that simply knows you are not alone. And from that place, something inside you becomes stronger, not louder, not more emotional, but more stable. Because your faith is no longer tied to constant reassurance. It's rooted in something deeper, something unchanging. And now, when silence comes, it doesn't carry the same weight. It may still feel uncomfortable at times. You may still have questions. You may still wonder about the future. But the fear that once filled that silence no longer has the same control. Because now, you understand something you didn't fully see before. Silence is not abandonment. Waiting is not rejection. And uncertainty is not the absence of purpose. God has been working, even when you couldn't see it. Guiding, even when you couldn't feel it. Present, even when everything inside you questioned it. And that truth allows you to move forward differently. Not with pressure to figure everything out, but with the freedom to trust. Not with a need to control every outcome, but with a confidence that you don't have to. Because you are not walking through this alone. You never were. And maybe that's what you needed to understand all along. Not the full plan, not every answer, but the assurance that His presence never left. So now, as you move forward from here, let this truth stay with you when your thoughts get loud, when your emotions feel heavy, when the silence returns. You don't have to interpret it the same way anymore. You can choose to remember what is true, that God is still with you, that your story is still unfolding, that this season, no matter how uncertain it feels, still has purpose. And even if you don't see everything clearly yet, you can walk with a quieter heart, a steadier mind, a deeper trust. If this message spoke to you, take a moment to reflect on what part of your journey needs this truth the most. And if you want to keep growing in faith, learning how to navigate seasons like this with clarity and peace, consider subscribing and staying connected. Because you're not the only one walking through this, and you don't have to walk through it alone. Even now, God is with you.